Hey, how's it going? Welcome to the stream. I'm merrymitch, and this is the Three Addict Network. I hope that this stream finds you in some good spirits, and that you're ready for our final story from P.H. Lee. At least as of last year. Hopefully this year he will write us up another banger. But for now, this will be our final P.H. Lee story. The final tale in the tales of the Great Sweet Sea. I'm looking forward to it. I know the last time around we had the pleasure and joy of hanging out with Bear in the Big Blue House, checking out his origin stories. And this time around, we will be checking out the story called Anne of Rags. Got to be pretty good. As of my physical state, I am feeling pretty okay today. It seems as though my voice has at least come back to me somewhat. And, I'll take it. I will take it. I think the voice will certainly hold out, at the very least, for this year's stream. And I'm hoping that it'll continue to hold out, because I've got our first D&D game back tonight with my Crawling Dusk crew. I'm super excited about that. I've been doing a lot of prep work here for it, and thinking it'll be a fun time. They just recently escaped from a crashed alien ship and are heading back to their vessel to toss in some new fuel. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. Yeah, but how's everybody doing? I have already started accumulating the clips and such for the next highlight reel. I know the first highlight reel was just played a moment ago, and I hope you enjoyed that. If you did enjoy that, I would highly recommend, and I would encourage everyone to be clipping things throughout this year's stream, because man, it does me a great service. Hey, Mod Shooter, glad you're doing good, man. And yeah, I suppose without further ado, let's swoop on over here. Oh, what's up, Bear in the big blue blouse, the big blue house? Shoot, as much as I do love you, my man, we are gonna have to poof ya. There we go. Oh yeah, and the last time around we had our word of the day as cow. But today we'll be on the lookout for our new word of the day. So, keep me informed. Keep an eye out for, any kind of clever or strange or curious words that we might come across today. Yeah, I'm still kind of reeling from that. Cow is a verb, guys. Cow is a verb. I can cow, you can cow, we can all cow. If you believe it. Pretty wild stuff, honestly. Now let's see. Trying to figure out where this story is set. Okay, it seems to take place at first in a forest. So, let me load up some forest ambiance from tabletopaudio.com. Alright, let's see. Probably not a super intense start, or, usually stories start a little bit tame, but you never know with P.H. Lee. We'll just go for some classic chill forest ambiance to kick off the story. Man, that's nice. Alright, cool. Well, guys, settle in, get comfy, and get cozy, and get ready for this here bedtime story. Oh, I said bedtime story. Force a habit. I'm sorry. Previously, when I would stream at night, I would be telling bedtime stories, but this time, it is a afternoon story. Unless somebody's going to bed right now. I guess if somebody's watching on the other side of the planet, yeah, a bedtime story it is. But nah, get comfy, get cozy, and get ready for this here afternoon story. This is Anne of Rags by P.H. Lee. A Tale of the Great Sweet Sea. I have heard it on the rumors that when a tale spinners guild gathers in their secret places, a full half of them are sworn to never tell the truth, and the other half to never tell a lie, even if it mean their life. Being one of that trade myself, I can tell you that that's more or less the shape of it. And I tell you so you'll know that this tale I tell you is true, just as I heard it, and just as it happened, for I am one of the ones sworn to the truth. The name I'm called is Dusty Boots. I come from the valley of Erwile, and I am in love with a girl I can never have. The story I tell you now comes from the endless forests, out north past the mountains, past the lowlands, where no man has been king for 1,000 years, and the winter sleeps, only small and restful, beneath an inch of ground. One day, a little girl, no one remembers her name, was out with her old doll in the endless forest, playing hide and seek and princesses pretend, all surrounded by those bleached white trees that reach thin up to heaven. As the day wore on, the girl and her doll wandered deeper and deeper into the forest, and by the time night fell, the girl was completely lost. At the night, the forest took on a different character than it had while the sun still lit it. The trees were more jagged and more pale, reflecting thin moonlight between them in some silent song. New animals emerged, strange ones that only knew the night, and they made creeping sounds from the undergrowth. The frost awoke from beneath the earth to walk its chill once more upon the land. The little girl grew frightened and curled up with her doll in her arms and began to cry. Her tears were so sad that they would have broken the hardest heart to her plight. And shortly after she began, her doll spoke to her in comfort. "Don't cry, my darling girl," said the doll, "for I will get you home. Listen to my words, and you will not suffer frost nor night nor monsters from the dark. As long as you have me in your arms and heed my words, no harm will come to you. And come morning, you will be safe and sound at your hearth once more." "But Anne," said the child, for the doll's name was Anne of Rags, and had been so through the whole of the family's history. It is dark and cold, and I am all alone. How will we ever find our way out of the forest?" "Fear not, my clever girl," said Anne of Rags, "for I am not stranger to the nighttime animals, and one will be along shortly to assist us." "Oh, hey, Bebo. I appreciate you." Drink.
Oh, it is time to drink. Again. Not again. It went down the wrong pipe again. This has been the drink. Drink!
Oh, that happened to you when you had a bite of waffle? Are you telling me a waffle went down the wrong pipe? How? How did that happen? Or was it a bit of the syrup? I feel like that might be worse. Bebo, I'm sorry. Also, I gotta say, Bebo, I appreciate you having this on while you're doing school. I know that might not be the best thing to encourage, I suppose, but regardless, your dedication means a lot, honestly. And I'm happy to have you here, man. Ugh. My poor throat. I gotta be careful when drinking water. Oh. 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 Even as the doll spoke her reassurances, a great owl, with wings a span across, came to rest on the tree before the little girl. Terrified by its enormous yellow eyes and fierce, sharp beak, the child hugged her doll even tighter to her chest and began to wail and cry once more. "Don't be afraid," said Anne of Rags. "My dearest girl, there is no reason to fear this old owl, for he is a friend of mine, and wise in the ways of the wood. And if you follow him, surely he will lead you home." "True," said the owl, and nodded sagely. And with that, he began to fly slowly out of the wood, expecting that the girl would follow him. I gotta say, I meant to have a trill to that true, but it didn't go as I expected. But the little girl was so afraid of those big yellow eyes that she stayed exactly where she was. Too terrified to follow the owl, even when Anne begged her to follow his lead and thus find her safety. And so the girl remained in the woods in the night, with the frost wandering further and higher, shivering as she wept into Anne's straw hair. "Don't cry, my lovely girl," said Anne, "for I have another friend amongst the nighttime animals, and surely one of them will hear your crying and come to our rescue. By this time, you must do exactly... Oh, but this time, you must do exactly as I say, or else surely we are lost." And true to her doll's word, in due time a great gray wolf came padding up to where the little girl lay crying and nuzzled. Oh, and nuzzled her with his big wet nose. Terrified by its yellow eyes and sharp teeth, the child hugged her doll even tighter to her chest and began to wail and cry once more, this time even louder and more pathetic than the last. "Don't be afraid," said Anne of Rags. "My precious girl, there is no reason to fear this strong wolf, although his appearance is fearsome, for he is a friend of mine, and wise in the way of the wood, and if you follow his trail, surely he will lead you home."
"Yes," said the wolf. "For my friend Anne, I would do anything. For my friend Anne, I would do anything."
Hang on, that water incident really did a number to my voice.
"Yes," said the wolf. "For my friend Anne, I would do anything. To lead a lovely girl like you from these dark woods is as if it were nothing at all. As if it were nothing at all. I am happy with only the chance to help you."
And with that, he set out from the woods, expecting the girl to follow him. But the girl was so afraid of those big, sharp teeth that she stayed exactly where she was, too terrified to follow the wolf, even when Anne begged her to follow his lead and thus find her safety. And so the girl remained in the woods in the night, with the frost growing up around her hair, shivering and chattering as she wept into Anne's cloth bosom. "Don't cry, my pretty girl," said Anne of Rags, her voice now faltering a little. "For though you have feared my two good friends, there are other animals in this forest, and they are not strangers to me. And surely one of them will hear your crying and come to our rescue. But this time, you must do exactly as I say, no matter how ferocious the creature, or else surely we are lost." And in due course, just as night snow began to fall around the girl, along came an old woman, with a back hunched like the mountains, and fingers long like your arm, blind in the right eye, and deaf in the left ear, clad in sugar and wine. In truth, and you would already know it if you had any sense, it was Bone Grandmother, the long-fingered woman, wandering this way and that in her nightly witcheries, conspiring with her son the Frost, harvesting the work of her 1,000 poisoned daughters, and other things so awful that mortal indecent folk such as yourselves do not even know the words to speak of them. Oh yeah, guys, it's Bone Mother, or it's Bone Grandmother. We all know Bone Grandmother. Man, gotta love her. But as soon as Bone Grandmother saw the beautiful little girl, curled crying in the snow, she put to rest all the other nefarious plans she had for that evening. for she knew just from the pretty sound of the girl's crying that this girl would have the tenderest finger bones she'd ever eaten. And eyes so innocent that they had not even seen one suffering, and a heart unbroken by even a single betrayal. Oh, yes, she was already smacking her lips in anticipation when she came up to the girl and, taking on a friendly visage, said, "Hey, thanks, Carbutt."
Oh dear, what a splendid little girl. How is it that your mother let you wander so far away from home? Well, there's nothing for it. You'll have to come back and spend the rest of the night at my little cottage. I'm afraid it isn't much to look at, but at least it will keep you warm for the night.
And she came up and wrapped the little girl in her cloak and dabbed away her tears, and for all the world acted just like a kindly grandmother. Gima bones. Dude, what's Gima? Germa bones? The little girl stopped crying and even started to uncurl a little when Anne of Rags gave a sharp cry. "No!" she said. "Don't go with this old woman, for I know her like I know all things of the night. She is Bone Grandmother, and she will lock you in a cage and eat your hands, and your eyes, and your heart, and then surely you will die. Stay here. It is better to leave ourselves in the grip of the dark and the cold than to be in her cottage, which holds nothing for children but pain and death." It was well known that Bone Grandmother preferred to eat only the smallest children, for as they grew older, their fingers grew gnarled through labor, their eyes jaundiced by suffering, and their hearts broken by betrayals. Oh, too true. Guys, have you... man, as we grow older, our fingers grow gnarled through labor, our eyes jaundiced by suffering, and our hearts broken by betrayals. Kind of a pessimistic way to see growing old, but I'll be darned if that isn't the truth. But despite Anne's warnings, the old woman's appearance was so comforting and her actions so kind that the little girl let herself be swept up in her arms and carried away. The woman's hut was a lonesome, tiny place right in the heart of the forest, thatched with skin and walls of bone. But in the dark, it seemed just another small hut, like all the rest of the girl's village, and it did not matter anyway, for the girl had fallen asleep, still clutching her doll in the old woman's arms. "Don't open your eyes, my love," said Anne as the girl awoke from her enchanted sleep. "For if you see what you will see, surely you will scream and cry, and then we will truly be lost. But if you are quiet, and you do exactly as I say, you might yet survive this night." The little girl, still tired from the sleep, did as she was told. "Child, you are in a bad place," said Anne of Rags. "You have been seduced and captured by Bone Grandmother, most evil of all 12 witches, and she plans to eat you up this night. She is down in the kitchen, making ready her tools. And you are trapped in a cage made of the bones of less fortunate children, who did not have dolls like I to protect them, or did not heed their words. Now, my most favored child, you can open your eyes, but you must not make a sound. The girl opened her eyes and saw that everything was as her doll had said. Now, blessed child, soon the wicked woman will be done with her preparations. When those are dispensed with, she will come over, reach up to your cage with her long fingers, and ask you to feel your hands. When she does so, you must place my hands out of the cage, and not your own. For she is blind in her right eye, and half blind in her left, and will not see the difference. Just then, Bone Grandmother looked up from her vials, ovens, and pans.
"What's that noise?"
she demanded of herself, and then remembered.
"Ah, my dearest child has awakened. Since your mother clearly could not care for you, I've decided that you'll stay with me a while longer."
She smiled at this, showing rows of sharp, yellow, crooked teeth.
"Now, let me see how horridly she's fed you. Hold out your hands through the bars so I can feel your fingers."
And she reached out with her knotted fingers, just as long as my arm is here, with wicked claws at the end of each. The little girl was terrified, but she remembered what Anne of Rags had told her, and held the doll's hand through the bars in place of her own. Since the old woman was blind in her right eye, and half blind in her left, she could not tell the difference between the doll's hands and the girl's. Rather, she wondered at the softness of the cloth-stuffed hands.
Oh, what soft and lovely hands,"
she said to herself.
"Your parents probably spoiled you, didn't they? Never worked a day in your life."
And with that, she dug her claws into the doll's hands and tore them off at the wrists.
"And now you never will."
Even though the girl was not harmed, she screamed and cried out with shock at the old woman's violence and evil laughter.
"Yes, that's right,"
said Bone Grandmother.
"Grandmother will be taking good care of you, and so you won't be needing these hands anymore."
Then she laughed again and went off to cook her prize. "My heart-held girl," said Anne of Rags when the witch had gone, "do not cry for me, for my blood is cotton and straw, and there is no harm to me that a needle can't fix. We should both be glad it isn't your hands that she's cooking right now." The little girl listened well and stopped crying. "Now, when she discovers that my hands are not the feast she hoped, she'll be angry, and she'll reach up to your cage with her long fingers and demand to feel your face. When she does this, you must put my face through the bars and not yours, or else it will surely end badly for you." Just then, Bone Grandmother had finished preparing those hands of cloth and cotton and straw. When she bit into them and tasted only dusty rags and not the soft bone and succulent flesh that she had expected, she spat the fingers across the room.
However your parents have spoiled you, girl, they certainly haven't fed you very well,
she exclaimed aloud.
For your flesh tastes of damp straw and dusty cloth.
Standing up, she paced around the hut, clearly agitated and angry, until finally she stopped beneath the cage, reached up towards the girl with her long, long fingers, and said,
Well, so much for your hands. Let me feel your face, my dearest little child, so I shall know the sins that you have seen.
You know, I just realized the ambiance could stand to be a little bit darker. Yeah. Sorry about that. That's better. True to her word, the little girl did not hold her own face out between the bars, but held up Anne of Rags for the old witch's inspection. The long fingers slowly caressed the doll's eyes, which were really nothing more than glass beads, and Bone Grandmother exclaimed at their fine qualities.
Why, I have never felt eyes so smooth, or so round. They are perfect in every quality. It is like these eyes have never seen suffering.
She paused a moment, admiring the eyes, and then she said,
Well, see to it that you never see any suffering at all.
and tore the doll's eyes from her head just like that. Wait. Is that the sound of an eye getting gouged? Honestly, not certain. Can't say I've ever been there. Even though the girl was not harmed, she screamed and cried out with shock at the old woman's violence and evil laughter.
Yes, that's right,
Said Bone Grandmother.
Grandmother will be taking good care of you, so you won't be needing these eyes anymore.
Then she laughed again and went off to cook her prizes. My brilliant child, said Anne of Rags when the witch had gone. Do not cry for me, for my eyes are glass, and my mind is string, and there's no harm to me that a needle can't fix. We should both be glad that it isn't your eyes she's cooking right now. The little girl listened well and stopped crying. Now, when she discovers that my eyes are harder than she'd like, she'll be angry, and she'll reach up to your cage with her long fingers and open up the cage and try to grab you out of it. When she does this, you must make sure that it is me that she grabs hold of and not you, or else surely this whole tale will end quite badly. Just then, Bone Grandmother had finished preparing the glass bead eyes that she had taken from Anne of Rags, thinking that they were from our little girl. But when she bit into them, not only did she not feel the fine, juicy that she was expecting, the eyes shattered in her mouth, cutting her tongue and cheeks in 1,000 places. She screeched in pain and spat blood and shards of glass across the room.
However your parents have sheltered you from the world, they clearly haven't kept your mind very well,
She exclaimed.
for your eyes are harder than ice in winter, and more fragile than an oriental teacup.
Standing up, she paced around the hut, agitated and angry, and spitting bits of glass from her bloody mouth, until finally she stopped beneath the cage, reached up towards the girl with her long, long fingers, and said,
Well, so much for your eyes. Let me take your body, child, so I can keep you safe from all the harm in the world.
With that, she flicked her long fingers in the locks of the cage, and, as the bone-barred door slid open with a terrifying old creak, the girl huddled in the back, terrified. "Child!" said Anne of Rags, suddenly and desperately. "Fast, clever, brave, and faithful child! You must throw me now in your place, and after I am gone you must run from this house, not looking back, until you have left the forest forever. Do not fear for me, for I am only a doll, and who will mourn my passing?" And though it grieved the girl to lose her favorite doll, she threw the doll into the long fingers that crept along the cage. The witch snatched Anne of Rags out of the air and cackled as she said,
You thought you could escape me with your little leap for freedom. But now that this world has never seen a child fast enough, clever enough, or brave enough to get the better of this old grandmother, with my fingers long as your father's arm, and my son Frost guarding the door. Ha! Enough of this foolishness. Let's put you in the oven and be done with you.
and with that, Bone Grandmother took Anne of Rags off to the kitchen to be roasted. The little girl in the cage did not hesitate for an instant, but dashed out of that house, not looking back, while the witch put Anne of Rags to roast. But even as the girl was running out from the clearing, the doll caught fire in the oven, for she was made of straw and cotton, and not of flesh, and she burned up not only herself, but the kitchen, the old woman, and the whole house. True to her word, the girl did not turn around, even to watch the flames of the house, or to listen to the dying cries of the witch, but kept straight on running until the sun rose, and she found her way back to her village again, and into the arms of her mother and father. I can't truly say what happened to that girl after her terrible night in the forest, but I've heard that she married a boy from the city, and together they lived a long time, and had many children, sons and daughters both. The doll, of course, was burned up and never seen again, but soon the girl had outgrown such childishness, and did not give her family's doll a second thought or tear. Her husband was a poor man, after all, and her daughters had dolls of their own, made from porcelain and silk. What good would they have gotten from an old straw patchwork like Anne of Rags? That is the story, the whole and heart of it, just as it happened, and just as it was told to me. If any man call me a liar, he has only himself to blame. Whew. Well, snap. That was actually a shorter one. And thank you. I've been practicing my Bone Grandmother performance for ages now. Practically eons. I'm just pleased I could finally bring it out, you know? It's about time. But man, that was honestly a killer tale. I gotta say, one thing that I appreciate so much about these stories has been the over-the-top characters. For me, I gotta say, it's certainly more fun to, well, I don't know. There are some instances where it's more fun to do serious and, realistic, readings, of course. Kind of like, Across the Dark Waters. That one was sick. And I enjoyed doing, a more realistic take on the dialogue. But, man, if it isn't a blast, just not having to hold back, you know? Hang on, let me get some water. And I'm hoping you guys enjoyed it. Also, again, I dig, like, the subtle, intense darkness from these stories. The bone grandmother, that small detail of how she lives in a house made of the flesh and bones of the children who were not so lucky. That's intense, man. Golly. It reminds me of this comic online. Let me see if I can find it. I think it was called The Bone Tree. No, The Bone Tree is a Penn Cage novel? Huh, okay. Wait, I have a bookmark of it. Yeah, metal as heck. That is right. Let's see. I do have it bookmarked, but I have a lot of horror comic and story bookmarks. Out of Skin. Yeah, this was the one. I won't show you a lot of it, because it is kind of terrifying. But let me just show you the first page here. Out of Skin. It was the rain. I didn't find them until the rain chewed up the earth, churned it into mud, and the floor of the forest spit them out. So yes, that must be right. It wasn't until the morning after the storm I saw them. Oh, terrifying, man. Terrifying. This comic is immensely subtle. I highly recommend anybody to go check it out. Here, I'll pop the link into the chat real quick. Seriously well done. It's spooky. It's not like give you nightmares kind of horror. It's you gross kind of horror. You know, body horror, if you will. And if you would like to see what a house made of flesh and bone is like, give that Give that story a look. Also, I am a little bit curious. In the past, on Saturday nights, I used to have a show called Spooky Saturdays. And I would read through horror genre stories. And I've considered possibly doing a segment here of horror stories. But it being earlier in the day, I've kind of held off on that and decided to look into, stories that are more lighthearted, or at the very least more just fantasy rather than horror. But if you would like to see or hear some spooky tales of terror and fear, then let me know. Alright, so we have gone through all of the tales of the Great Sweet Sea. So next, I would think let's look into one of the other series here. There's Dungeon Space, Legends of the Burnt Empire, From the Lost Traveler's Tour Guide, The Caslow Chronicles, The Tales, and finally, The Tales of Gorlan Visenfirth. Visenfirth. Visenfirth? Visenfirth. Visenfirth. I think it's Visenfirth. Gorlan Visenfirth. Gotta say, that name does intrigue me. What do you think, guys? Any of those jump out at you? I will say, at first glance, The Lost Traveler's Tour Guide does sound kind of interesting. And The Tales of Gorlan Visenfirth also sounds kind of cool. Alright, taking too long. Let's just go top to bottom, or bottom to top rather. We've done Tales of the Great Sweet Sea. Let's check out the Tales of Gorlan Visenfirth. Ooh, okay. The first Gorlan story was a novel, long since lost to time, written in the author's teens and shredded in his 20s. Oof. In that novel of origins, the young bard Gorlan Visenfirth was given a typical task of saving the world. To keep him on track, one of his fingers was cut off and replaced with the stone finger of a gargoyle. Alright, I'm tracking, I like it. As long as Gorlan kept on his quest, the stone was limited to his finger. But if he strayed, or tried to avoid his duty, the stone took over more of his flesh. By the time he had finished saving the world, the single gargoyle finger had become an entire hand. Assuming the corresponding gargoyle had seen similar transformations in its flesh finger, Gorlan sought this nameless goyle in hopes of arranging an exchange. The gargoyle's name turned out to be Spar, but Spar had no ability to undo the magic of the priest who had done the deed in the first place. Together, they now seek this itinerant mage, hoping for restoration to their original forms. Oh, no school? Well, okay. Mark Laidlaw. He's got 2 stories here. We'll check out the first, and if it's a solid read, we'll check out the other one. Your lunch break is over. Shoot. Just as we're about to start the next story, too, man. Sorry about that. Also, it is mega warm in my room here. Alright, and where's this taking place? the pinksing of his Edeldamer? Can I say that? What is pinksing? Can I say that? Hang on. What is pinksing? No, not pining. Pinksing. Abbreviation PINKS, used to identify the painter of a work that has been reproduced in a different medium, such as engraving. Compare delineate. Wild, man. Alright, I think we've got our new word of the day. Alright, hold up. Whoa. Ah. Whoa, no. I think it's Latin, apparently. Oh wait. Let's do this. There we go. Huh. Alright, word of the day, guys. Pinksit. Or pinksing. Pinksing? Pinksing. It is to, like, painting something. Abbreviation is PINKS. Used to identify the painter of a work that has been reproduced in a different medium, such as engraving. Hang on. I also want to see if it has the pronunciation.
Pinksit.
Pinksit.
Pinksit. Pinksit.
Pinksit, baby. It's wild, man. Alright, looks like they're getting drinks, so we'll go for the tavern audience. Or, sorry, ambience, not audience. Hit me with that tavern ambiance, please. Thank you. Alright, guys, let's check this out. So, get comfy, get cozy, and get ready for this here afternoon story. This is Catamounts by Mark Laidlaw, from the series The Tales of Gorlin Visenfirth. I have my limits, said Gorlin Visenfirth, hooking a full mug of cheap brew toward him. With one of the petrified fingers of his stony right hand, a coarse black strand of beard hair poked up from the foamy head, like a sick fern's frond.
And you, sir, are quickly approaching several of them at the same time.
The question is, how bad do you need the money? The man whose beard had gone a long way toward sopping up Gorlin's drink possessed but one eye and a scarred socket. The rest of his face was no prettier. 250 oracles for a day's walk. He lifted his beard to his lips and sucked noisily. More than enough to buy seafare out of Nagahast, without engaging in your illegal profession. Gorlin absently began a thoughtful pinksing of his elder damer, which sat unwrapped on the tavern bench beside him. One Eye's hand landed warningly on his wrist, silencing him, but not before numerous heads had turned fearfully in his direction. To strum more than a few notes in succession was to risk a steep fine under the Nagahast nuisance noise ordinances. Considering that he was down to his last few pence, he would more likely end up working off the fine in the sewers. Nagahast was a curse to a traveling bard. The sooner he abandoned it, the better. But he could hardly swim the Snool, and he hadn't enough to pay a traveler's fare. One Eye must have overheard him asking some sailors about crewmen's work. They had laughed him off. A man with one stone hand was worse than useless among ropes. But 250 oris would take him across 10 inland seas like the Snool, in luxurious first-class cabins. Are you drinking this? The man asked, eyeing the mug that Gorlin had pushed aside.
Be my guest.
He looked away from the toothless mouth, but could not so easily avoid the loud slurping. It was a relief when he heard the mug slammed down against the wooden table. For that, my friend, I thank you. And in return, I extend the offer of easy money. One Eye scratched an esematous patch beneath his beard. Esematous? Hang on. I want to look that up too. Oh, it's eczema. Eczematous. Huh, okay. So it's just like eczema-y.
If it's so easy, why don't you earn it yourself?
Well, no. For me, it would be dangerous. But it'd be a childish task for you. Simply deliver a sealed parcel to Old Dog, the wizard in the mountains. Run up, hand over the goods, hop back down. There you have it.
And who would pay me for this task?
Why, Dog himself. It's half on delivery, you see.
What of the other half?
I already spent that. Oh, but I earned it. Getting what he needed. I've already done the hard work. Now Old Dog wants his wants in the worst way. But I daren't go up to deliver them.
That's the part that interests me, Gorlin said. Why ever not?
Because I'd be recognized. You're a stranger. They won't bother you, I'm sure of it.
They, Gorlin said. So much for easy money.
The plains rose gently toward the peaks of Nagahast, green giving way to rocky brown, and then to solid gray heights. He looked back at the Snool, fog adrift over the bays and peninsulas, veiling the distant shores. Tomorrow, he would sail into that mist. But for now, he had a long climb ahead of him. Among gigantic sharpness of rock, he moved up a grating trail, rock rattling and sliding constantly underfoot. The walls looked blacker pace by pace, while the whiteness of clouds that crossed the gap intensified. Even this late in the morning, the granite gave off a chill more suited to midnight. He hiked until his legs and his lungs did more than merely protest. Then he sagged onto a flat slab of stone near a dripping spring. Swallowing a mouthful of dried fruit, he filled his cup from the rivulet, tasting of ice, moss, and iron. As he sat contemplating the trail ahead, a warm body brushed against his ankles. Gorlin jumped at the touch, recoiling onto the stone. A large gray cat with jade eyes leapt up beside him. Oh man, I do be trying to get the right purr sound. It's just a slight bit off, I think. Oh well. Chuckling, Gorlin stroked the cat's head. It was sleek-furred, strong, plump from a diet of mice and marmots. It seemed glad enough for human company to have been a house cat. Wondering if he had a spare bit of jerky, he started to unknot his travel sack. Suddenly, the cat began to hiss at the other sack, the one he'd been hired to carry. It stood with arched back, hackles high, one paw poised defensively with claws extended.
"No, kitty," he said amiably. "That's naughty to do with you."
He reached to stroke the cat again, but this time it rounded on him. Spitting and yowling, one wicked claw tore into his sleeve. He gave thanks he'd worn a padded jacket for the climb. Leaping from the slab, he snatched the bag and held it out in case the cat decided to leap. But the beast shrank back, growling, ears lowered, head pressed to the rock, staring up at him venomously.
"I was going to feed you," Gorlin said reprovingly.
The cat took another swipe at him. He let out a shout, feigning an attack, and the cat sprang from the far side of the rock. He heard no further sound. Time to move on. Now that was a changeable beast, he thought as he walked. Of course, many cats are fey that way. One moment they're in purring ecstasy as you pet them. The next instant, you've got fangs sunk deep in the meat of your hand. The jolt of adrenaline refreshed him marvelously, and he settled into a pace he imagined would carry him to Dog's house well before sunset. He had not reckoned on the ascent's increasing steepness. He came to crude stairs hewn from the rock. Although he gained altitude quickly, the climbing was hard on his knees. By the time he sighted landing above, he was once more in dire need of rest. Then he saw the second cat. It was a beautiful beast, thickly furred with spotless white, suited for hunting in the mountain snow. One eye was gold, the other was green. Both gleamed like stars. It seemed no more fearful of him than the first had been, but Gorlin was weary now, remembering the mercurial nature of most cats. His wariness changed to pity as he climbed close enough to see that the poor cat was missing a limb and sat propped unevenly on a single forepaw. He expected it either to flee or to greet him with a growl. But it betrayed nothing and sat immobile. He paused several steps below the landing. There was no way to skirt around the beast. "Hello, Puss," he said. The white cat lowered its lids. He mounted a step closer. "Poor Puss," he said. "Little hoppy. How'd you lose your leg?" The cat watched him intently, ears cocked. Their eyes were now at a level. "Caught under a boulder? In a rock slide?" he said. "Nice kitty." Corlin put out his right hand, the gargoyle-kissed limb of solid black stone. The cat merely sniffed. "Friends? Friends?" he said. It arched its back to rub against him. "Friends? Ah, good kitty." As he leaned to pet the cat, his bag swung forward from his shoulder. The cat reared back and struck at his stone fingers, screeching. Corlin lashed out, clubbing the beast in the head. The cat lost its uneven footing and toppled off the landing. Corlin hurried up the trail as the cat tumbled some distance down the steps. He looked back to see it sitting up dazed, shaking its head. Then he turned a sharp angle, and all was hidden. Not the cat, dude! And it's a poor little three-legged cat, too. Corlin kept his pace for perhaps an hour, even past the point where the stairs finally came to an end. It was not hunger that finally made him stop and throw down his bags. There was something in the sorceress' sack that frightened, angered, or repelled the cats. Anti-feline amulets, for instance. If the wizard dog ever wished to come down this trail, he must have needed such an item to repulse the couple of ferocious cats. Corlin looked at the light, lumpy sack for some time. The mouth of the bag was intricately knotted, and the knots were sealed with brittle wax. It was none of his business what he carried, and he couldn't consider jeopardizing his pay in order to satisfy a niggling curiosity. Nonetheless, he wished he could have access to the magic if it would ease his journey. Stones rattled on the trail above. A dwarvish figure advanced slowly, with a peculiar and uncomfortable gait. Its growl was loud enough to echo in the confining chasm. Corlin wished, not for the first time since taking his bardic oath, that he had not forsworn the carrying of weapons. He should have at least taken the time to select a sturdy walking stick that morning. He sagged when he saw that the gnome-like creature was an orange tabby with orange eyes, its pupils gleaming like cut black jewels. He noted with more shock than pity that this aggressive beast lacked both forelegs. Having no other option, it walked on its hind feet like a monkey or a man. Monkey! Let's go! Lacking arms, it also lacked an aura of real menace. Corlin chuckled, his sense of bizarre irony overriding his instinctive distaste. As the cat approached, Corlin slung the magic sack over his shoulder. He did not find the cat particularly threatening, but he had learned discretion. No sooner had he lifted the sack than the cat Then the walking cat let out a wail and charged him. Gorlin screamed like a cat himself when the tabby sank its fangs into his calf. He threw it off at once, but it landed on its feet and came after him, hissing and howling. Flight and not discretion now seemed the wisest course. The cat gave a spirited chase, but they soon reached a place where the gorge widened slightly and the trail was heaped with broken boulders. It was hard enough for Gorlin to hop from stone to stone, but the pursuing cat immediately lost its footing and vanished into a chink. After that, loose rock was everywhere, an unnerving symptom of frequent avalanches. Old snow lay between the rocks and dirty ice-crusted walls. Gorlin stooped with his cup to catch meltwater and drank it, without breaking his erratic stride. He dug into his sack for nuts, fueling himself without pausing. Inevitably, his pace slowed. He thought about the cats he'd passed, contemplating the progression of their mutilations. And it was thus with very little surprise that he spotted cat number 4 up ahead. His suspicions were confirmed when he saw that this once handsome calico, retained but a single limb, her left hind leg. He wondered how long she had been watching with her calm, meditative blue eyes, perched at the edge of a rock-strewn ledge, her single leg stretched out behind her in a rare spot of sunlight. She licked her chops, presiding over a heap of small, cracked bones. "Now you," he said, mainly to himself, "don't frighten me at all." She gave him a look as if to say, "Oh, really?" Stretching languorously, she extended her hind leg until her toe pads brushed an enormous granite boulder that teetered on the ledge. It was the lightest of touches, but the boulder began perceptibly to shift. "No, no," Gorlin said. "Nice kitty." The cat yawned, ribcage stretching under the fur, hind leg reaching still further. The enormous rock grated, tipping. Gorlin skipped a few steps up the trail, nervously shooing at the cat. The calico rolled onto her back, a kitten's playful move, and gave the boulder an unimpaired rabbit kick. Gorlin darted sideways, though there was nowhere really to dart. He found himself on the wall of the ravine, trying desperately to climb like a spider trapped in a basin. The huge stone crashed from the ledge, looking up at the oncoming rock, now seemingly afloat on the clattering tide of lesser fragments. He knew he could never climb high enough. Resting his weight on his stone hand, he threw his body higher. The boulder crunched over his arm and went on, carrying the storm of thunder, dust and gravel away down the gorge. Gorlin looked down at his unscathed black stone hand, which knew nothing of pain. He had never been so grateful for the gargoyle affliction. On her ledge, the cat no longer looked so haughty, as Gorlin strode angrily through settling rock dust. She slunk back as best she could. The thought scarcely penetrated his anger that it might be unwise to confront a pussycat that had only just now, ever so casually, kicked off an avalanche in his honor. He leapt onto the ledge, prepared to deliver a powerful block to the cripple's frail-looking ribs. But the cat looked so pathetic. One-legged, she regarded him with a bitter hatred that for a moment he could almost understand. Anger vanished. He kept an eye on her as he climbed past, but she made no further move. Dude, this is like, frickin' a kitty boss rush. It's kind of wild. It's a cat boss rush, but each of the cats has less limbs and more smarts. It occurred to him to wonder how the sorry cats had lost their limbs. Did they owe the losses to some improbable chain of natural events? Rockfalls, fights with vicious predators, or even with each other? But the wounds were cleanly healed, as if sewn and tended. The fur grew thick with no signs of scarring, and there was something ritualistic about the injuries. The cumulative amputations suggested a human agent. No wonder they hated men, and lay in wait for any who might mount this path. The sky grew purple. The clouds showed orange edges. Now came occasional promising glimpses of peaks above, which suggested that he was near the end of his climb. He would be out of here by nightfall, if his luck held. He had become gradually aware that this ravine darkened further, of soft rattling sounds somewhere near him on the trail. He could not be sure if the noises were above or behind him, signs of pursuit or of ambush. He softened his own steps, although he could be only so quiet on the loose rock. It occurred to him that he was waiting for cat number 5. The very thought of such a creature filled him with horror, though he could not imagine how it might possibly harm him. Still, he had underestimated cat number 4 to his peril. It was a relief when his view of the evening sky continued to expand. He could feel wind now, blowing down from snowy peaks that became clearly visible above. But he felt no less vulnerable on the open slopes, where in the dusky light, every twisted bit of blown, weathered wood looked like a snaky figure lying in wait. Due to fatigue and eye strain, each of these shapes seemed to writhe and wriggle toward him in the gray light, moving sinuously, furtively through the stones. Shortly after sunset, the slope leveled out in a forest of ancient dwarf pines. The trail continued into the clutching trees. I'm safe, Gorlin thought, for he had come to associate danger exclusively with the rocky defile and its denizens. Yet, several minutes' fast walk into the bleak woods, he recognized his relief as premature. It was far darker here than on the slopes. A scant few miserly stars blinked through the black needles. His eyes swarmed with weird lights and shapes, symptoms of hunger and exhaustion. Worst of all, the sounds he'd heard on the last part of the climb seemed still with him, though altered in character to suit the changed terrain, muffled now by mulch and moss. It's weariness, he told himself. But all the same, he grabbed a shattered branch, and not for use as a walking stick. He was crossing an icy creek where darkness gathered like cold air, when he heard a slithering crash behind him He leapt to the far bank and spun back with a cry, brandishing the stick. There was nothing behind him but the fading trail, and a sense of unseen danger drawing near. He searched the stunted trees, flinching from a dark, ropey shape until he realized it was a beard of hanging moss. Shaking off his nervousness, he devoted himself to the trail. Finally, as the last trace of light leached from the air, he saw a house ahead of him. Flames were kindling in the thick, bubbled windows. A thin drift of smoke uncoiled from the chimney. Gorlin raced himself to the door and hammered till he heard an answer. The fellow who opened the door was naked, but patched all over with so much hair that at first Gorlin thought he wore a moldering hide. The wizard dog, who looked part dog himself, peered at Gorlin. Then one furry finger darted out and snatched the sack from his shoulder.
This... Yes! Yes! Yes!
The gruff dog danced gleefully toward the fire, hugging his sack without a backward glance. Gorlin stepped in and shut the door behind him. The sorcerer continued to ignore him, as he laid the bag on the table, spread with stuffed birds, crushed powders, and less identifiable oddments.
Took you long enough,
he mumbled.
How many months has it been, son? Sign?
Like a sine wave?
How many months has it been since I sent you out?
That wasn't me, Gorlin said. Dog craned around to peer at him.
I thought you looked too good to have weathered all the spells I've been slinging to draw you back here.
Yes, I still retain both my eyes.
Well, I've got my wands, and that's what matters.
He busied himself examining the seals, satisfied with their virginity. He snapped them to bits and began to unknot the ties. Gorlin cleared his throat loudly. There is one more thing that matters, he said. My payment. 250 oracles. The magician rounded on him.
Payment? After all this time? After you delayed my work for how long? I wouldn't give you half a green pentacle. You'll be lucky if I don't extract payment from you. Or find uses for your parts if you persist in pestering me.
Gorlin was rarely dumbstruck, except in matters of money.
No answer to that, eh? Wise fellow. Now leave the way you came. Make no fuss, and I just might let you go unharmed. Off with you now! Off! Off! Before I send something to snap at your heels!
Gorlin did not move. The dog must have thought that an order from him was congruent with the deed. He unpended the sack, sending its contents tumbling over the table. Gorlin's shock at being swindled gave way to a graver dismay when he learned what he had carried up the pass. 10 furry wands lay scattered on the scarred, charred tabletop, like jointed jackstraws. Chuckling, still oblivious to Gorlin, Dog arranged the wands in an obvious order. First the white one, then the pair of striped gold, followed by 3 of dappled calico, and the final 4 of purest shiny black. Angry disgust swept through him like a fever. He nearly leapt on Dog's repulsive back, but it was scabbed and matted from louse and flea infestation, and he couldn't quite bring himself to touch the mage. At that moment he heard soft scratching at the door,
About that payment,
Gorlin said. Dog remained bent over his workbench, doting on his treasure.
Are you still here? I'll consider the debt paid when some others have collected what they're owed. This is my last word on the matter. Be gone!
Gladly, Gorlin said, and opened the door. The gray cat sat on the stoop, blinking up at him. Gorlin stepped outside and pushed the door wide, bowing low. The cat gave a soft meow of recognition, then stepped quietly, as only a cat can step, into the cottage. Behind it came the white cat, pointedly ignoring him as it limped up the steps and went in.
I do apologize,
Gorlin whispered. Next came the orange tabby, skipping eagerly forward on its hind legs, rushing through the door. And then the potent calico, thrusting herself along with her sole limb, leaping more agilely than he might have suspected in a kind of pouncing pogo motion. There was a moment when Gorlin thought the fifth cat would never appear. Then he realized that he was looking at it, so black that it appeared of a piece with the darkness. It slithered snake-like up the trail, its sad shoulder blades digging rapidly into the earth like blunt little spades under the folds of furry skin. Its whiskers were frayed and twisted. Its bony frame and dusty black coat suggested an unimaginably hard life. The king-to-tail had been severed midway and crushed at several points along its remaining length. Even so, the cat impressed Gorlin with reserves of unguessable strength. He received the distinct impression that it had been waiting for this moment. The cat, in sliding up the steps, suddenly swerved toward Gorlin. He leapt back fearfully, but there was nowhere to go. It darted toward his feet, and he nearly shrieked when it touched him. But all the poor beast did was twine betwixt his ankles, emitting one loud purr, like a contented puss on its way to a full saucer. Once all were inside, Gorlin eased the door shut. The last thing he saw was the 5 cats advancing slowly, each in its own unique fashion, toward the preoccupied dog. Their utter silence inspired his own retreat. Man, this was made in 1996. Yo, what up, dog? Yo, my pup is here. Mark Laidlaw is best known as one of the creators and lead writers on the Half-Life video game series. But he initially got that gig on the strength of his short stories and novels of fantasy, horror, and science fiction. His novel, The 37th Mandala, won the International Horror Guild Award for Best Novel. A writer at Valve since 1997, currently working for the online game Dota 2. His short stories continue to appear in various magazines and online venues. That's actually awesome. Who would have guessed? We'd come across one of his stories here. Man, that really is fantastic. It's an older tale, but that was quite good, honestly. Hang on, you guys want to see my pup? Yeah, Half-Life's got a good story. Gordon. Gordonius. Hang on, let me switch to here. And then let me show you. Oh, if I can. Yo, Sadie. Sadie. Come say hi. What's up? Let me get out of the way. What's up, puppers? You say hi? She doesn't really bark too much. What's up, girl? Aww. What the dog doing, though? Pat, 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 pat. She does love attention. All right. That'll have to be enough for now. Yo, what the dog doing? What the dog doing? Oh, Stevie. I'm gonna get out for a walk with her once we're done here. We will go into the great outdoors and travel across the sidewalks, through the waterfall park, through the foresty area. But yeah, that was my puppers. Her name is Sadie. Alright, we back over here now. But man, yeah, Gorlin Visenfirth. Gotta say, it's a pretty slick story. And the fact that he followed up with the idea that he had in high school, I gotta say, that is admirable, to say the least. That is wildly admirable. He took, because he apparently wrote a whole book that he has since shredded and tossed aside, which is unfortunate. But he had a whole book written out about this character. And he decided, hey, you know, what if I give this, another shot and try to put him within the format of a short story. And honestly, it's wickedly well written. I mean, heck, it's got freaking pinksing in it. It's got the word pinksing. On Good Mythical Morning, we ask the age-old question, yo, what the dog doing? I gotta say, those poor cats, though. Those poor cats. I mean, I guess, I don't know. If somebody really didn't like cats, they might be down with what happened in this story, but I'm not okay with it. I'm glad the cats got their revenge, but still, what does a wizard need with cat limbs? Am I right? If that was the only way... Sorry, my dog is still looking for love. Still looking for pets. Sorry. Okay, Peebo. No worries, man. Get back to work. Do your school. Learn well. Study hard. Yeah. Story was well paced. It had a bit of mystery to it. The mystery, I think, was revealed again at a nice pace. You know, the first instance I thought was just kind of like a weird quirk to the story where the cat comes by and is like, "Yo, what's up?" but then gets really angry at the sack. And that's honestly, that's a good way to build intrigue even more. To have a, you know, sort of impartial animal come and react to it in a certain way or in a certain manner. That's clever. That is clever. Well, normally I would say let's go ahead and jump into the next story. But I believe I've been asked to end things about 15 minutes early, which means we only have about 8 minutes left. Yeah. So is there an 8-minute story that we could find? This was called Catamounts. Wonder why it was called Catamounts. Not sure. At the very least, we can go and look at Bellwether. Yeah, this appears to be probably more than an 8-minute read, I would suspect. Dang, man. Well, I guess we'll definitely have to check this one out next time. Because I will say, this dude is a professional writer. These are some good stories. The Tales of Gorlin Visenfirth. Gorlin as well. I really like that name. Gorlin. Gorlin. Would you name your kid Gorlin? Would I name my kid Gorlin? Is his name Gorlin because gargoyle? Like Goylin? Goyle. And that can't be right, right? I like this place not, said Spar. Who is Spar again? Spar was the gargoyle. Yeah. That's right. And just goiling around, dude. I'm goiling. Bro, when you goiling? That moment when you goil? I don't know why. Gargoyle moment is kind of funny to me. Like, hang on. Check this out. Gargoyle moment. Gargoyle moment. Let's go, dude. I want to make that a thing. Classic gargoyle moment, am I right? Heck yeah. Wonder if... Dude, there's no way, right? Hang on. Just since we're like screwing around, I want to see if I can make this happen. All right, check this out. Watch out, Seeds. Watch out. Do you think? Think it'll support my weight? Gargoyle moment! Bro, gargoyle moment! Alright. I'm coming down. Yo, that was a gargoyle moment. Beautiful, dude. That's entirely feasible for me to just climb up there at any point. We should have like a something that's like redeemable. Just for my segment. Just says gargoyle moment. Alright, need some water. Hang on. Goyle. Hang on, I'm gonna do it one more time. Goyle! 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 Alright. Coming down. Oh yeah. Nah, man, I'm like a cat. I land on my feet. And I'm built like a gargoyle. So I can't break. Or rather, I can. But if I do, I'll fall apart into little stone pieces. And can be gorilla glued back together. Well, that do be my time, so thanks for being with me here for this gargoyle moment, and thanks for enjoying the final P.H. Lee tale about Anne of Rags, and the bonus tale from Mark Laidlaw within the Tales of Gorlin Visenforth. This was a fun little romp, and yeah, now I'm gonna go get some lunch and rest up a little bit and go for a walk with my pop. Guys, thank you as always for joining us here on the Three Attic Network. I pray that it was a fun time for you as much as it was for me. Stick around, stay tuned, and hoping that you enjoy the rest of the Three Attic show today. Much love. Remember to take the merriment that we found here together today. Let it set you at ease as you go into the rest of your day. and let it carry you into tomorrow. I love you guys bunches, and I hope to see you next time. Farewell. I've been Merry Mitch.